The Fire Within by Krista Lacey. We are now on page 251, Bye-Bye Conker. 2 minutes later, the car was parked and the talk had turned to squirrels again. "Come on, Mom," Lucy was saying. "We need to find a good place to let them out." She grabbed Liz's hand and pulled her along the library path. Sophie laughed softly, watching them go. "They're a funny pair, aren't they?" "You can say that again," David muttered, switching the carrier to his other hand. 2 active squirrels were surprisingly heavy. Sophie turned and walked backward a step. "Don't you like being their tenant?" "Yeah, they're great. They're just..." "weird, especially when it comes to dragons." "When we were in the car just now, did you see Liz's eyes change color?" Sophie gave him a questioning look. "Honest, I saw it in the mirror. They're normally green, but I saw them go violet." Sophie sighed wistfully and tightened her scarf. "Lucky Liz. Wish mine did that. They do go bluer in the right light." "This was different," said David, shaking his head. "She went all dragony for a moment." "Her," breathed Sophie, laughing as she blew warm air into her hands. "I'm serious. There's something odd about these two. When we get home, ask Lucy to show you Gwendolyn. That's one of her special dragons. If you stare at it closely, you can see Lucy in it." "So?" "Well, sometimes when I look at Lucy, I think I see it the other way around. It's just as if..." "Stop there." Lucy reappeared 10 yards ahead at a hairpin bend in the path. "Go closer," she shouted. "And don't make a face." She brought her birthday camera to her eye. "Oh no, not photos," Sophie winced. "I always make a face." She slipped her arm inside David's and smiled painfully. There was a click. Lucy immediately shouted, "Mom, I took a picture of David and Sophie snuggling up." Liz's voice floated back. "I'm sure they'll treasure it all their lives. Come on, I found a good place." David and Sophie unsnuggled themselves and followed Lucy along the path. They found Liz sitting on an ivy-colored wall, looking through a gap in the cluster of trees. The pond, with the brand stand away to its left, was framed at the bottom, like a picture postcard, in the distance. Just visible was the wishing fountain. "This is good," said Sophie, sitting down beside Liz. "Scrubby and woodsy, lots of places to bury acorns." Speaking of which, David popped the carrier down on the path and took a bag full of acorns from his pocket. "Here, you can be a nut monitor," he said, dumping them into Lucy's hands. "Brilliant," said Lucy. "These are the ones he stole," she told Sophie. David half knelt beside the carrier. "Well, now it's time to give them back, and to let Conker see his new home." For the first time, Lucy looked a little glum. "Do we really have to let them go?" David nodded at the carrier door. Snigger was clinging tightly to the mesh, doing his best to gnaw through the catch. Lucy's bottom lip began to buckle. She stepped forward into David's arms and let her head fall against his shoulder. "Thank you for saving him." David gave her a squeezy hug. "We all saved him, silly. You, me, your mom, Bonington." "Sophie," said Liz. "Snigger," said Sophie. "Gadzooks," sniffed Lucy. "He helped a lot." "We'll have mentioned everyone in Scrubbly in a minute," muttered Liz. She raised an eyebrow in the hope of moving things along. "Come on," said David, steering Lucy to the box. "You do the honors, just like before." Lucy paused and looked at Sophie. "Conker won't die today, will he?" Sophie tugged on the ends of her scarf. "No." "Okay," said Lucy. She bent down and quickly released the catch. With one light bounce, Snigger was out. 2 flicks of a pepper-colored tail took him to the opposite side of the path. He skipped through the black hooped railings and bounced a little way down the muddy embankment. Pausing, feet splayed, to peer at the trees, his tail flicked out like a puff of gray smoke. Conker, meanwhile, was still huddled up in the back of the carrier, showing no visible sign of emerging. "Should I tip him out?" David asked Sophie. "Throw in a nut," she suggested. Lucy rolled one in front of the carrier. Conker twitched as the acorn clacked against the plastic, but he still refused to budge. To make matters worse, competition had arrived. An inquisitive squirrel had just scrambled down the trunk of a tree and was edging up the path toward the group. It hopped fearlessly over David's foot, poked its nose briefly into the carrier, twitched with surprise at the sight of Conker, found the acorn, twirled it, and ate it on the spot. "Try again," said David. Lucy dipped into the bag. "Mom, that might be Shooter," she whispered, nodding at the eating squirrel. "It might be Snigger's Aunt Mabel, for all we know," said Liz. "Come on, throw some nuts." Lucy let a handful tumble down the path. Within minutes, she was handing out more. Snigger and Shooter both took acorns. While they were busy burying them, two more squirrels arrived. One appeared at Liz's back, sniffing at the fur of her sheepskin coat. The other, a sleek-looking creature with a tail like a fountain, whom Lucy vowed was certainly Cherry Lee, came so close that Sophie was able to feed it by hand. Suddenly, squirrels were popping up everywhere. In the midst of it all, Conker hopped out of the carrier. Bewildered by the hubbub going on around him, he scrambled to the refuge of a nearby boulder and huddled up against it, tail laid flat. David tapped a worried foot. "Don't fret," said Sophie. "I've released lots of animals back into the wild. They often take time to settle. Oh, gosh, look at that one." David followed her gaze. An extremely large squirrel had just appeared on a free root right behind Conker's boulder. With a deftness that seemed to defy its bulk, it leapt onto a stone, looked down on Conker with a curious eye. "It's Birchwood," gasped Lucy. "That's the one that chased Snigger from the fountain," said David. Birchwood dropped onto the path, making Conker chirr in alarm. "No," said Sophie, holding David back. "You mustn't interfere. Conker has to learn to fend for himself." "Against him?" David tightened a fist as Birchwood leaned forward to sniff Conker's tail. "Sophie's right," said Liz. "You can't always be here." She prodded Lucy. "Throw Birchwood an acorn." Lucy boiled the last one down the path. To her anguish, it twirled well past the big squirrel and wedged beneath the boulder, nearer to Conker. Conker lowered his head to investigate. "No, don't go for it," David muttered, convinced that Birchwood would launch an attack. Which he did, but not against Conker. Another squirrel came forward to steal that nut, and Birchwood turned on that one instead. "Huh!" squealed Lucy, as Birchwood chased the other squirrel through her legs. The remaining squirrels scattered into the trees. Birchwood returned to the path in triumph. He took up his position on the boulder again and let Conker eat his acorn in peace. "How extraordinary," said Liz, taking a picture. "It appears that Conker has found a champion." "That's bizarre," said David, sinking down onto the wall. "I've been trying for weeks to think of a way that Birchwood could turn out to be a hero in my story, and I just had a great idea. If I were at the computer now, I know who Birchwood would be." "Who?" said Lucy. David flicked a twig into the cluster of trees. Conker's dad. We're now on page 260. Hello, Gruffin.